immediately or otherwise, we will not necessarily like what happens in those countries after we've gone. Women will not have equality. There will still be torture chambers. But it is for the Muslim world to decide their own future. It's not for us to decide it for them. The British knew there would be a terrible civil war in India when they partitioned India and helped to create Pakistan. But they left, and more than 1 million died, 2 million in fact. We knew there'd be a civil war in Palestine if we ended the mandate, but we ended it, and there was a civil war between Jew and Muslim in Palestine. I think the idea of a just war has gone, which is one reason why we've got to leave. I don't believe in just wars. If you saw what I see in the battlefields in the Middle East, you would never support a war, any kind. And after World War II, where, yes, there were lots of moral reasons where we had to fight Nazism and fascism and the people who were murdering the gypsies and Jews and socialists and everyone of Europe who disagreed with them under the mantle of Hitler, yes, of course, that was a just war. But after World War II, when we have the UN, when we have the ICIC, when we have human rights, do we have any more just wars? That's why we've got to go. I don't know, afterwards, will we be seen as running away? There will be those who will try to pretend that is what happens. I was very struck when I was in Canberra in Australia about a year ago. I was at a dinner and some generals in the Australian Army came to the dinner and they were telling me that in their military college they were doing exercises on whether it was necessary to double the size of the Australian Army. And I, being a Brit, of course, said, look, Australia is just a big sandpit with a green bit around the outside. There's nothing there. He said, we have the largest Muslim nation in the world to the north of us, and they can be in Sydney with tanks in 2 days. Now, I think that was an exaggeration, but I get the point. And his point was that if America retreats out of Iraq, they may wish to withdraw their Pacific Shield, and then the Australians are on their own. I don't believe this scenario is going to happen, but what I'm saying is that that shows what the effects will be, not on the Arab or Muslim world, but on the rest of our allies. I'm just giving you this as a bit of reality. I'm not taking a side in it at all. But I mean, by saying we have to leave, I say it because I believe fewer people are going to die, both theirs, which is on an enormous scale, and ours, which is comparatively small. The second question again, sorry, what was the second? Just give me, Barack Obama, sorry, forgive me. Yes. Look, I was in Qatar actually broadcasting on Al Jazeera as the independence correspondent in the Middle East when Obama made his Middle East trip. And you'll recall it was 24 hours with the Israelis and 45 minutes with the Palestinians. And I remember the anchorman on the Arabic service said to me, do you think Obama will be elected? And I said, to the Israeli Knesset, yes. As for the presidency of the United States, I'm not sure. Look, I think that America's policy towards Israel is so entrenched, so permanent, so well established, militarily, politically, and financially, that no US president can break free from it for the time being. It's total uncritical support for Israel, right or wrong. America is perfectly free to support Israel and to demand the security of Israel and help to protect it. But it should also demand the freedom of the Arabs and protect them too as equals. Otherwise you won't get 2 states. I do not believe in the one-state solution. Obama has not mentioned once in any speech, so far as I know, the only possible solution, or let's say resolution, solutions don't happen anywhere, least of all in the Middle East, to the Arab-Israeli conflict, and that is UN Security Council Resolution 242, which calls for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from territory occupied in the '67 war in return for the security of all states in the area, including Israel. And it also insists upon the illegality of the acquisition of territory through war, which means close down the settlements, which are not built on Israeli land, they're built on Arab land. And of course George Bush, in that famous letter to Ariel Sharon, effectively tore up 242 and said there were facts on the ground. He was talking about the great settlements like Male Adumim around the east of Jerusalem, thus of course cutting off the Palestinians from East Jerusalem as a capital and West Jerusalem as an Israeli capital. And then we have Obama talking about the unity of Jerusalem in the future and it must remain and so on and so forth. The Arabs actually did believe in Obama, not because his middle name was Hussein, but because he grew up poor. And most Arabs are poor. They shouldn't be, but they are, given the wealth of their leadership, I mean. But I think I was out there when Obama made, as I say, the Middle East trip, and you should have seen the astonishment. And of course, I was saying to my Lebanese friends, I told you so, I told you it wasn't going to be a change. It's not going to make a difference. Obama might like to make a change, but I think it's something he'll realize is important when he's no longer the president. I mean, Carter had many chances. And Carter's a good guy. I mean, I thought he was an excellent book. He doesn't deserve to be called anti-Semitic because he used the title apartheid. What else is the war? But it was only after he was president that we heard those straightforward, tough-talking truths from a US politician. One of the things, I'll make the last comment to you, is that one of the things that sickens me is that both in the British Army and the US military, forgive me for talking about the US military, are the generals who salute and say all the right things when they're in Iraq, and the moment they retire, they condemn Rumsfeld and say it's a hell disaster. Why didn't one of them, just one, say that in uniform at a press conference? It would have been an earthquake, and it would have had all the newspapers asking questions like why and investigating all the background, but of course everyone is in line, no more so than your and our journalists. Gentleman down here who's so persistent, he's got to have a mic. Mic is coming to you there. Please go ahead.
I'd be interested in your accounts of the dramatic developments in Lebanon. You've lived there for a very long time, the 2006 war, and then the events of June and onward, and what your appraisal is of where the Lebanon situation stands and what the potential is for the future.
Okay, I'm going to try and do this in approximately 2.5 minutes. One, Lebanon is a totally false and artificial country. It was created by the French as a sectarian state, where the president has to be a Christian Maronite, the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, the speaker of parliament has to be a Shiite Muslim, and so on. To be a modern state, it has to deconfessionalize. But if it deconfessionalizes, it will no longer be Lebanon, because the identity of Lebanon is sectarianism. It is a Rolls-Royce with wonderful food, immensely intelligent people, snow-covered mountains, Roman ruins. It is a Rolls-Royce with square wheels. It doesn't work. On that basis, it's not surprising that every country in the region, and especially the regional superpowers, have interfered in Lebanon's history since 1958. And certainly ever more so in the Civil War, and again now. The 2006 war was basically America fighting Iran using its Israeli and Hezbollah proxies. It was also a war fought to test new weapons. The deep penetration bombs which the Israelis used on the southern suburbs of Beirut, and the ground-to-sea missiles which the Iranians used. They almost sunk an Israeli warship. It burned for 25 hours. They lost 2 members of the crew overboard, never seen again. This was a testing ground. The Iranian defense attaché in Beirut paid close attention to that, because these missiles were not available to the Iranians during the Iran-Iraq war. The current situation, even though Mr. Bush tells us that it's a thriving democracy and they had to seed a revolution, is that because the Hezbollah, under pressure from the pro-American government of democratically elected Fuad Signora, the moment the press called it pro-American, I knew it was doomed. American-supported government of, I mean, if I was Signora, I'd say, please, 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 go away, you know, like Saudi Arabia, if Ralph Peters has his way, you're not going to come and protect you again. No, but what happened was that when the Hezbollah effectively took over West Beirut, I was there, I live in West Beirut, I mean, they were outside my house, with weapons. It forced the government effectively to capitulate. Whereas they got, after former Prime Minister Saad Hariri was murdered on February 14th, 2005, they got the Syrians out, UN Security Council resolutions, they abided by it, and the idea was that there would now be a, if not anti-Syrian, at least Syrian-free government. But because of the Hezbollah investment of West Beirut, there was a new peace agreement at Doha in Qatar, the same Al Jazeera capital, country, and this agreement stipulated that the minority in the cabinet who represented those who may not be pro-Syrian but certainly weren't anti-Syrian, including the Hezbollah, who have a minister in the government, would have a veto over majority decisions in cabinet, which means effectively the Syrians are back. But there will be another war next year, I think, and I fear, between Hezbollah and the Israelis. The Hezbollah have built deep underground bunkers with landline telephones 16 feet to 20 feet below the surface. They don't want to use mobiles because the Israelis can listen to them. And both sides are trying to find out when the war will begin. The Israelis talk constantly of the need, because they want to get their own back for 2006, to smash, pull out the roots of world terror. I mean, this stuff's been going on ever since 1948. And the Hezbollah are longing to have a go at the Israelis again and speak of the next war. They talk about it. And the intelligence of both sides is very good. I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that happened in 2006, which I discovered very shortly after the ceasefire, which Mr. Blair wanted to delay in the hope the Israelis could manage to kill some more Hezbollah. What happened was that I discovered that the Hezbollah had managed to obtain Israel's aerial reconnaissance pictures of the Hezbollah bunkers in southern Lebanon. And the Hezbollah can read Hebrew fluently, of course, because they've been in Israeli prisons. They're planning to open a Hebrew service of Manar Hezbollah TV, by the way, in case any Israelis want to pick up some hints, I suppose, I don't know. But they watch Israeli TV, of course, and fully understand it. And, of course, they could read the Hebrew on the pictures and identify which of the bunkers on the photographs the Israelis had spotted and which they hadn't spotted. So that when the Israelis started the bombing, they bombed empty bunkers. The Hezbollah were all in the underground shelters, which weren't marked on the pictures. I assume they got the pictures. We think they got them from Israeli border guards, perhaps Druze, and there's a thriving drugs trade that goes across the Lebanese-Israeli border. The Hezbollah do not take drugs, but they certainly trade in them. That's just a little bit of the broken glass on the floor to show you what is going to happen again and what was happening then. A lady at last. I think it's a lady. Yes, it is. I can see with my glasses. In green. That was just to check in case, because I didn't have the right glasses on.
Hi. Thank you for coming. I had a question that's basically about your motivation for being a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to take this on? It seems like you've been hugely effective in informing a lot of people about things that they're unaware of. I'm just wondering what inspired you.
Alfred Hitchcock's 1940 film Foreign Correspondent. Hands up those who remember it. Joel McCrea. Excellent movie, isn't it? Joel McCrea as Humphrey Haverstock of the New York Daily Globe. War is coming to Europe. It's 1939, and his editor calls him upstairs because he's the crime correspondent. He says, what we need in Europe is a crime correspondent, which is what we need in the Middle East at the moment, by the way, crime correspondents. And he goes off on the Queen Mary to England. He goes to Holland. He witnesses the assassination of a Dutch politician. He's chased by the Gestapo. He uncovers the top German agent in London. He's shot down by a German pocket battleship over the Atlantic. He lives to file a scoop, and he wins the most gorgeous woman in the movie. And I thought, age 12, I thought this was the job for me. When I was on a beach in Portugal covering the aftermath of the Portuguese Revolution, we're now going to come to the Middle East, I got a letter from my now long-dead foreign editor. I was on the Times then, this is pre-Murdoch, of course, saying that the Lebanese civil war had broken out, that our correspondent, Paul Martin in Beirut, had just got married to a German billionairess who owned a Schloss in Germany with a huge wine cellar, apparently, and that she didn't want to spend the first years of her marriage in a civil war, so he was going to Paris, and would I like the Middle East? I was 29 years old. It was the Times of London, which in those days was a very respectable paper. And I always remember the words he wrote is, referring to the job I'd have if I went to the Middle East, it will be a great adventure and lots of sunshine. Lawrence of Arabia calls sunshine a sword, and he was absolutely right in that region anyway. So I went, and I suppose I got caught up on the idea that I was witnessing history, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, the Islamic Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War. I think that's when it lost its adventure for me, because that was on a scale of warfare like my dad was in the Third Battle of the Somme, much older than my mother. He was born in 1899 and was in the First World War. And but I think after that, I didn't feel it was much fun being a foreign correspondent, but I wanted to be because I had this idea that we were the first witnesses to history, and there was a kind of privilege in that, however terrible it might be. Amira Haas, who's one of my heroines, and who I know well as a friend, who works for Haaretz, and if you don't read her, you should. We were having a discussion about foreign correspondence in Jerusalem more than 2 years ago, and I was doing my Brit thing about, we're the first neutral witnesses, blah, blah, blah. And she said, no, Robert, you're wrong. Our job is to monitor the centers of power and challenge authority, especially when they go to war, and especially when they do it with lies. And that's the best definition I've ever heard of our job, or what our job should be. But now, I did, when I was doing the book tour for my previous book, The Great War for Civilization, in the French and Dutch editions, and I was lecturing in France and Holland, and I was very struck by seeing families walking on the boulevards of Paris and by the canals in Amsterdam, and they seemed happy. Everyone has their problems, but they hadn't gone through the life that I'd gone through. And I did go back to Beirut, and I sat on my balcony, and I looked at the sea one evening, and I said, I'm 62 now, you can't wind the movie back and start again. It's not Alfred Hitchcock, foreign correspondent. And I asked whether, if I knew then, in 1976, what I know now, would I have taken the job? And I decided that I would have taken it, yeah. But I don't think anything I've written has ever opened a cell door or saved anyone from death. I think collectively, journalists who try to do what I try to do, and hopefully with me as well, we might have helped to do that. But there's no proof of it. But I suppose there's something more deep down than that. And it's a bit like covering the Middle East is a bit like reading this enormous, tragic, but powerful novel. I keep going back to the Battle of Borodino in